In late 2023, a quiet move from Cairns to suburban Brisbane set off one of Australia's most sophisticated lone wolf crime investigations. What looked like an ordinary relocation hit a drug and weapons network stretching over 1,000 kilometers, moving meth, cash, and firearms across state lines. Over 14 months, police tracked more than $650,000 laundered through legitimate businesses, uncovered industrial drug operations, and seized military-grade weapons, silencers, signal jammers, and encrypted devices. From 45,000 Australian dollars dead drop gun deal to multi-kilogram drug seizures worth hundreds of thousands. Operations X-Ray Riyle, X-Ray Tough, and Strike Force Beckenbeeni exposed how modern organized crime thrives by staying invisible. One mistake brings everything crashing down. Perfect crime. How ITSTR to picture this. It's November 2023. A 32-year-old man once tied to gang life. An experienced dealer who understood how the system worked packs up and moves from Cairns to Newport, a quiet suburb just outside Brisbane. On the surface, it looks like a normal relocation. Nothing flashy, nothing suspicious. But this wasn't a fresh start or a legitimate business move. Behind the scenes, he was laying the groundwork for something far more calculated, a drug distribution network that would eventually span more than 1,000 kilometers, running from far north Queensland all the way down to the central coast of New South Wales. This was the beginning of Operation X-Ray Riyle. The Australian Federal Police didn't randomly stumble onto him. There was no tip-off or sudden breakthrough. What caught their attention were the patterns, money shifting in unusual ways, parcels moving between unexpected addresses, and phone traffic that carried the familiar fingerprints of criminal communication. When investigators began connecting the dots, they uncovered something far more dangerous than old-school Bikie violence. This was modern, organized crime, quiet, structured, designed to stay invisible. The man at the center wasn't running a back-alley setup. He was hiding in plain sight, weaving himself into legitimate business operations. That was the brilliance of it. Between August 2023 and November 2024, police tracked more than $650,000 being washed through three ordinary-looking businesses: a landscaping company, a nail salon, and a heavy equipment rental business. Normal places, forgettable places. Exactly the kind nobody would ever suspect were fronts for serious criminal activity. The infrastructure of INVISIBII is where most people misunderstand modern money laundering. It's no longer about duffel bags full of cash or money buried underground. Today, it's layered, digital, and deliberately boring. The lone wolf operation built a system where dirty money flowed into legitimate business accounts, blended seamlessly with legal income, and then disappeared, shifted into cryptocurrency wallets, offshore accounts, or rerouted across borders. On paper, everything looked clean. Even routine bank checks wouldn't raise alarms. This wasn't just about cleaning money. It was a full-scale criminal ecosystem. Drugs were imported in wholesale quantities, stored in residential properties, processed on-site, packaged using specialized equipment, and then moved across state lines through an established interstate network. When police finally moved in and executed search warrants, the reality of the operation became impossible to ignore. On November 20th, 2024, officers stopped a Toyota RAV4 on the Bruce Highway near Townsville. Inside the vehicle, they uncovered 1.7 kilograms of pure methamphetamine, street value estimated between $300,000 and $400,000. The driver, a 42-year-old woman whose identity was suppressed, was arrested on the spot and remanded in custody. That single seizure hit the operation hard, and that was only the beginning, the big score. Another team was already moving further south. At the same time, police launched Operation X-Ray Tough, zeroing in on a separate arm of the same syndicate, the Gold Coast Logistics Hub. On November 23rd and 24th, 2024, officers executed coordinated search warrants across 4 locations: Parkwood, Oxonford, Varsity Lakes, and Wargary. The timing was deliberate. Every raid hit at once, cutting off any chance of warning calls, wiped phones, destroyed evidence. The main focus was a property in Warrangaria, owned by 39-year-old Cleet Adesoy. What police uncovered inside painted a clear picture of how prepared this operation really was. The seizures weren't random. They were the tools of a fully functioning criminal enterprise. 1.22 kilograms of methamphetamine, of grams of cocaine, and abisbo coca strips hidden inside balloons. a synthetic opioid commonly diverted into the black market. Multiple firearms, including a pump-action rifle silencers, clearly not kept for legal purposes, ballistic vests and armor plates, a signal jamming device capable of disrupting remote communications, $100,000. In Australian cash and industrial-grade money counter vacuum sealers used for drug packaging. Faraday bags, designed to block all radio and wireless signals and prevent access to encrypted devices outside the property. Police also located two high-end vehicles, a stolen Dodge Ram and a Mercedes GLC 63. Adesoye appeared in court on November 25th and was remanded without bail. He faced 20 charges, including possession of drugs exceeding 200 grams, 6 weapons charges, 3 counts of possessing detachable magazines without a license, and refusing to provide PIN codes for his devices. That final charge mattered. It showed he knew exactly what was on those phones and made a deliberate effort to keep police locked out of his communications. The weapons pipeline. Strike Force Beckenbeeni. But the operation didn't stop with drugs and cash. As Queensland police worked through the supply chain, investigators in New South Wales uncovered something just as dangerous, a dedicated weapons pipeline feeding the network. Back in February 2023, the NSW Raptor Squad, a specialist unit focused on organized crime, quietly launched Strike Force Beckenbeeni. Their attention was fixed on lone wolf figures operating along the Central Coast, particularly their role in supplying drugs and firearms. The investigation wasn't rushed. Officers spent more than a year building the case through surveillance, undercover work, and carefully timed moves. At the center of it was 26-year-old Jack Andrew Mellon from Magenta. Mellon used an encrypted messaging app called Threma, operating under the alias TOPG. Through that platform, he organized firearm transactions with someone he believed was a regular criminal buyer. What he didn't know was that the person on the other end of those messages was an undercover police officer. What Mellon was doing was clever, disturbingly so. His method relied on something known as dead drops, a system designed to keep buyers and sellers completely separated. In a dead drop, the two sides never meet. The buyer leaves cash at one location, maybe a car park or a public bench hand, sends a coded message. The seller collects the money, then places the weapons at an entirely different location. The buyer picks them up later. No face-to-face contact, no witnesses, barely any risk. In February 2023, Mellon ran a $45,000 weapons deal using this exact setup. An undercover officer left a Woolworths shopping bag filled with cash at Finley Place in Bateau Bay. An accomplice, who has since passed away, retrieved the money. At a second location, a freezer bag containing 3 firearms and ammunition was left behind for the undercover officer to collect. Mellon later received the proceeds. There was zero direct contact between buyer and seller, but eventually, confidence turned into carelessness. In March 2024, Mellon agreed to meet in person at Terrigal. This time, the exchange happened face-to-face. An undercover officer met him in a public location, where Mellon handed over a Culture King shopping bag containing 1 firearm, 2 magazines, and additional ammunition. The price was $35,000, a 5-figure gun deal carried out in broad daylight, in plain view of the public. By August 2024, Mellon was allegedly looking to expand beyond weapons. He attempted to supply 1 kilogram of MDMA for $29,000. The deal never went through due to a breakdown in communication. That failure likely prevented significant harm. 1 kilogram of high-grade MDMA could have flooded the party scene. Instead of becoming another drug bust, it became a crucial piece of evidence in a wider criminal conspiracy. Human resources, drivers, couriers, financial handlers, lookouts, suppliers, distributors, a full organizational structure leaner than old-school gangs, but far more flexible and harder to dismantle. Weaponization, access to military-grade firearms, underground supply lines for guns and ammunition, the ability to redistribute those weapons to other criminals. This is what worries law enforcement most. You can arrest the people at the top, you can seize the assets, you can dismantle the infrastructure, but the knowledge doesn't disappear. The demand for drugs and guns doesn't fade, and eventually someone else steps in to fill the gap. The arrest phase, reality catches UP for Jack Andrew Mellon. The 26-year-old weapons supplier, the end was inevitable. He pleaded guilty to supplying firearms and attempting to supply MDMA. He's now awaiting sentencing. And given the scale of the operation, he's facing serious time behind bars. Other lone wolf figures, Aaron Knoll and Thomas Maloney, also entered guilty pleas for their roles in the network. Zachary Wright, 31, took a different path. He pleaded not guilty to supplying GBL gamma-butyrolactone, weapons offenses, and dealing with proceeds of crime. His case is heading to trial next year. And then there's Clede Adesoy, the man running the Gold Coast Logistics Hub. He didn't even apply for bail. Once he saw the evidence laid out, 20 charges, multiple firearms, commercial drug quantities, and specialized technology designed to evade police, he knew it was finished. At that point, there's no fighting it. That's not a setback. That's a life-changing collapse. The bigger picture, the national CRISA's what makes this case bigger than a handful of arrests is simple. This wasn't a one-off. It was part of 3 coordinated investigations running at the same time across multiple states. Operation X-Ray Riyle, Operation X-Ray Tough, and Strike Force Beckenbeeni were all aimed at the same criminal. Syndicate, just different cells operating in different regions. The scale alone is confronting. The network stretched more than 1,000 kilometers. The investigation ran for over a year, quietly building evidence piece by piece. And the coordination involved federal, state, and local law enforcement, all working in sync. The outcome was the takedown of what police described as one of the most significant coordinated crackdowns on alleged lone wolf activity in recent history. But even with that success, investigators are under no illusions. This wasn't a cure, it was damage control. The demand for drugs is still there. The illegal firearms market hasn't disappeared. Money still needs to be laundered. And every major syndicate that falls leaves behind a gap. In Australia's criminal underworld, those gaps are filled quickly. But police weren't trying to break the encryption. They didn't need to. Instead, investigators relied on patience, intelligence gathering, and traditional police work. They tracked behavior. They watched patterns. They ran undercover operations. They followed financial trails. They worked with informants. Most importantly, they conducted real-world product exchanges with undercover officers, creating what's known as product authentication, physical evidence that directly ties a person to criminal activity. Meanwhile, the suspects grew careless. Inside their encrypted chats, they spoke freely. Prices, quantities, customer details, plans for future deals. That operation led to more than 800 arrests globally and the seizure of vast quantities of drugs and weapons because criminals felt safe talking openly in what they believed was a secure environment. In the end, encryption didn't save them. It simply made them easier to map, monitor, and ultimately arrest. The September 2024 Hammer BLOWBI, September 2024, police had everything they needed. Months of surveillance, undercover buys, financial trails, physical seizures. The case was tight. There were no loose ends left to chase. It was time to shut it down. On September 11, 2024, officers from the Raptor Squad launched a coordinated strike, executing 9 simultaneous search warrants across Gosford, Springfield, and Parramatta. The timing was deliberate. Everything happened at once. By the end of the day, 10 men were under arrest. What police seized during those raids showed just how dangerous the network had become. 8 firearms, including a machine gun, a pistol, a shotgun, and multiple silencers, $40,000. In cash, more than 300 grams of cocaine, more than 300 grams of methamphetamine, 1.6 kilograms of steroids, 5 liters of cannabis, oil, additional quantities of for everyday communities. That's unsettling. It means the nail salon down the street could be washing hundreds of thousands in drug money. It means the quiet guy at the gym might be supplying firearms. These networks are harder to spot, tougher to dismantle, and when they collapse, fallout violence, overdoses, armed crimes, just as deadly. Credit where it's due. The Australian Federal Police, the Raptor Squad, and every officer involved showed that careful, patient police work can still bring down highly sophisticated criminal operations. But this isn't a finish line. Every operation that ends marks the beginning of another. Organized crime isn't defeated in a single rat, it's an ongoing fight with no real endpoint.